The opinions expressed in this episode do not necessarily reflect those of the Murderish podcast. Sensitive topics are discussed. Listener discretion is advised.
Turning left onto a snow-covered street, Donnivan Schaeffer shifted his candy-red pickup truck into higher gear and sped toward his first stop of the evening. He could see the bright yellow sign in the distance beyond the bill of his baseball cap, through the faint, falling snowflakes. A part-time courier, Schaeffer's focus was elsewhere when he arrived for work at Diggum Donut Shop in Rapid City, South Dakota, on March 8th of 1992. The 22-year-old had just come from his fiancé's house, where the two of them gushed about an impending out-of-town trip and shared a brief embrace before he headed out the door. So distracted was Schaeffer, he barely noticed the back entrance to the 24-hour bakery was unlocked as he stepped inside to drop off supplies. It was shortly after 8 p.m. on a Sunday, nearly 2 hours before the night shift was due to arrive. As he came around the corner into the back office, Donnivan suddenly realized he wasn't alone. There, across the room, was a man he recognized elbows deep in a steel desk, rummaging for cash. Before the college student had time to react, the burglar lunged at him with a hunting knife, stabbing him once in the stomach and a second time in the back as he turned to escape the danger he was in. The pain was excruciating and blood was everywhere. Donnivan, an experienced outdoorsman who'd grown up around guns and knives, knew that if he didn't get help soon, he would die. Abandoning any sense of young male bravado, Donnivan begged his attacker to call an ambulance, promising not to share a word about the crime or his identity. He told the burglar he had a family, a fiancé, a reason to live. "Sure you do," the man said. The bald and bearded crook placed the tip of the blade against Donnivan's back and led him to a nearby storeroom. Once inside the fluorescent-lit space stacked high with flour and sugar, he tied Donnivan's arms behind his back and forced him to sit cross-legged atop a set of pallets. Donnivan again begged for his life, his cries muffled from the outside world by thick concrete walls. Showing no mercy, the perpetrator ordered the young man to look at the ground, his tears and blood splashing the tile floor below. A moment later, the man drove the 7-inch hunting blade through his victim's neck and into his skull, rendering Donnivan Schaeffer dead in a matter of seconds. With that, the man finished the burglary, grabbed his satchel, and headed out into the cold South Dakota night in a getaway car that awaited him. This is Jami, and you're listening to Murderish. Join me as I explore the 1992 murder of Donnivan Schaeffer. Forever immortalized by the words of Cary Grant in the 1959 Alfred Hitchcock thriller, North by Northwest, Rapid City, South Dakota, sits on the eastern edge of the Black Hills, an ancient mountain range rising from America's Great Plains. The area's original inhabitants, the Lakota Sioux, gave it that name because the hills were so thick with pine trees, they appeared black from a distance. Considered sacred, the land was promised to the native people by treaty in 1868, but that treaty would be abandoned just 6 years later. A government-funded expedition led by Civil War hero General George C. Custer discovered gold in the Black Hills. Although Custer wouldn't live long enough to see it mined, he was killed in 1876 by a band of revenge-minded Sioux at the Battle of Little Bighorn. The rush he started could not be stopped. In the coming years, European-American settlers flocked to western South Dakota in droves, hoping to strike it rich. The vast majority came up empty, One group of failed miners built Rapid City, hoping to capitalize on the irrational exuberance in other ways. Merchants moved in to sell fortune seekers the necessary tools and supplies. Before long, they had earned enough money to attract new businesses, allowing the city to break free from the boom-bust cycle and become a major center of trade and commerce. A key stop along the Western Railroad, Rapid City attracted entrepreneurs of every kind, from cattlemen to casino owners to oil prospectors, and they brought their families with them. What few Sioux remained were forced to the outskirts of town or into the massive Pine Ridge Reservation, 40 miles to the south. Today, Rapid City is a bustling tourist town surrounded by natural beauty. South Dakota's second-largest city, Rapid's main attraction, Mount Rushmore. Gutzon Borglum's massive carvings of Presidents George Washington, Abraham Lincoln, Thomas Jefferson, and Theodore Roosevelt attract 2.5 million visitors each year, many of whom include a stopover in Rapid City. Its heavily trafficked highways, coupled with the cheap cost of land, have made the largely rural area a haven for tourist traps. Out-of-towners can hit Reptile Gardens, a massive zoo built in the middle of cornfields, or Bear Country, USA, which charges guests up to $75 a vehicle to drive past herds of elk, deer, goats, and yes, the occasional black bear. Those with more time can pay a visit to Dinosaur Park or do a day trip to Jewel Cave. To the east is Badlands National Park, and to the west, Devil's Tower National Monument. Despite its reputation for wholesome family fun and natural wonders, Rapid City has a dark side. According to FBI statistics, the city has a murder rate that's nearly 35% higher than the national average. The city averaged 7 murders per year between 2000 and 2020. Although nearly all could be attributed to domestic violence or disputes among friends. Much of the crime is spillover from the Pine Ridge Reservation, one of the poorest and most violent reservations in the United States. Despite the city's violent streak, local authorities spend most of their time focused on drugs, primarily methamphetamine and opioids. Homicides involving a perpetrator that did not know their victim are exceedingly rare. Before Donnivan Schaeffer's body was discovered in the back of Diggum Donuts in 1992, such a crime had not been recorded in Rapid City in over 15 years. Even armed robberies were infrequent, with just 11 occurring in all of 1991, according to local news reports. So it goes without saying the savage murder of a smart, hard-working, soon-to-be college grad in the back of a donut shop left the entire Black Hills region shaken and fearful. Police Captain Doug Noyes said to the Rapid City Journal at the time, "These kinds of things just don't happen in Rapid City." Rapid City Mayor Steve Allender described it this way to TV station KELO 2 decades after the slaying. There were a lot of rumors that started circulating in the community about a killer on the loose. Everybody was worried about their kids. Mayor Allender, who in 1992 was a detective with the Pennington County Sheriff's Department, was lead investigator on the case. The lawman turned mayor told the Argus Leader newspaper years later, "This guy on the loose could mean anything. It could mean he's in your garage when you go out, or waiting in the parking lot when you get off from work." Of course, none suffered more than Peggy and Ed Schaeffer, Donnivan's parents. Peggy said to the Rapid City Journal shortly after her son's death, "I never dreamt in my wildest dreams I would be in this position ever in my life. People in this community just could never have expected something like this, ever. It's so senseless." Donnivan's heartbroken father added, "Someone has taken something valuable from us, not just us, but the community as a whole, the entire Black Hills. Donnivan Schaeffer was born on December 23, 1969, in the tiny town of Blackhawk, just outside Rapid City. The younger of two brothers, Donnivan was blessed with curly brown locks, a trait he carried into adulthood. His mother said about Donnivan, he was a hugger, a helper, a hard worker, a fun kid who loved to laugh. He loved to help. If he could help, he was there. If he could make someone laugh, he was there. Donnivan excelled in sports from the time he was in grade school. He was a 2-time state champion in archery and competed on a junior Olympic roller hockey team. Like many South Dakota youth, Donnivan was an avid hunter and fisherman. Ed regularly took his 2 sons on summer trips to Montana, where the 3 of them would hunt deer and elk. Having inherited the rambunctious spirit of his great-grandfather, Theodore Beale, Donnivan was a natural joker who loved to make others laugh. Playing card games between college classes, Donnivan would shuffle the deck not by hand, but by shooting the cards into the air, then stirring them into a pile on the table as they fell. When he wasn't hunting or fishing, Donnivan loved to wrench on the red 1979 Ford pickup he bought in high school. A grainy photo shows him seated atop the hood, wearing Wrangler jeans and brown cowboy boots, proudly gripping his bow and arrow. At the time of his death in March of 1992, Donnivan Schaeffer was only 2 months away from earning a degree from Western Dakota Tech, where he was studying to become an electrical engineer. Though he already had a good-paying job lined up with a telephone company in nearby Spearfish once he finished college, Donnivan was working 2 other jobs to earn extra cash: his night job as a courier and maintenance man for Diggum Donuts, and his daytime gig doing acoustic ceilings for a company called Soundscape. Donnivan hoped to use the money to start a life with his fiancée, Sheila Pond. The 2 began dating as seniors at Stevens High School in Rapid City and remained committed while Donnivan studied electronics. According to the Rapid City Journal, Donnivan Schaeffer's funeral was more of a celebration of life than a mourning or passing. Organ music was replaced with the Kentucky Headhunters' Spirit in the Sky. A flutist played Garth Brooks' ballad, The Dance. His mother Peggy said he wouldn't have it any other way. When you're already stressed out about a developing health concern, nothing's worse than arriving at your medical appointment and getting completely brushed off by your doctor. Instead of listening to your concerns and trying to calm you down, the doctor seems to be acting like he has something better to do. With ZocDoc, you'll have access to top-notch doctors who are all about you. They'll genuinely listen, pay attention, and make your well-being their utmost priority. ZocDoc is the only free app that lets you find and book doctors who are patient-reviewed, take your insurance, are available when you need them, and treat almost every condition under the sun. When you're not feeling your best, your doctor's job is to provide support and find solutions to help you feel better. The last thing you need is added stress from being treated like an inconvenience or burden. But it can also be very time-consuming to try to find a new doctor you actually trust. That's where ZocDoc comes in. Using their free app that millions of users rely on, you can find the right doctor that meets your needs and fits your schedule. Within a few taps in their app, you'll be able to book an appointment and start feeling better faster with ZocDoc. Go to ZocDoc.com/murderish and download the ZocDoc app for free. Then find and book a top-rated doctor today. Many are available within 24 hours. That's ZocDoc.com/murderish, ZocDoc.com/murderish. I think one company must have started packaging their detergent in these huge, clunky jugs, and then all the others just followed suit. Just because that's the norm doesn't mean it's really the best way. I mean, those clunky plastic jugs are not only inconvenient and awkward, but they're horrible for our planet. 91% of those jugs end up in landfills and oceans, harming our planet and marine life. Look, I know it's not like we can just stop doing our laundry, so here's what I did. I switched to Earth Breeze. My new Earth Breeze laundry detergent eco sheets look just like dryer sheets, but they're not. These revolutionary liquidless laundry detergent sheets dissolve 100% in any wash cycle, whether it's hot or cold. And no more measuring and messy spills. You just toss the eco-friendly sheet into the wash and you're good to go. Earth Breeze Eco Sheets are lightweight, biodegradable, plastic-free, hypoallergenic, and dermatologist tested, so they're sensitive skin approved. They offer flexible subscriptions that can be adjusted, paused, or canceled at any time. No tricky contracts or fees. Most importantly, you still get a powerful clean. Earth Breeze is tough on stains, fights odors, and your clothes come out clean every time. I was pleasantly surprised by how fresh and clean my laundry smelled after using the Eco Sheets. Don't just take my word for it. You can try for yourself with their risk-free 100% satisfaction guarantee. If you don't like it, Earth Breeze will give you a full refund. No questions asked and no return necessary. Switch from the old-fashioned goo to something new. Right now, my listeners can subscribe to Earth Breeze and save 40%. Go to earthbreeze.com/murderish to get started. That's earthbreeze.com/murderish for 40% off. earthbreeze.com/murderish. In 1990, Dennis and Donna Diggs established their first donut shop on West Main Street in Rapid City. One of only a handful of places in town open past 1 a.m., Diggum Donuts served cops by day and stoners by night. The small family business eventually sprouted into multiple locations. The growth made it necessary for Dennis and Donna to hire couriers to shuttle their warm, sugary creations from their primary bakery to satellite locations in neighboring towns. On the night of his death, Donnivan Schaeffer was delivering supplies to the original Diggum Donuts on West Main. The night crew discovered his slumped-over body at 10 p.m. when they arrived for work, with his legs crossed, his arms tied behind his back, and still bleeding from his torso. The grisly scene could scarcely be fathomed, including by investigators, who found no signs of forced entry and no evidence of a struggle. The money in Donnivan's pockets was undisturbed. Police wondered why a thief would turn to murder over a measly $3,000 in stolen cash and checks. It would all make sense as soon as they met Donnivan's killer. For Charles Russell Rhines, trouble began early and came often. Born in McLaughlin, South Dakota on July 11, 1956, Charles Rhines was the youngest of 4 children. His father managed a farmer's co-op, and his mother was active in local politics. Yet, try as they might, Richard and Ruth Rhines could not govern their son, Charlie. In an interview with the Rapid City Journal in 1993, Rhines' high school principal described his former student as always in some sort of trouble. The administrator said he was a discipline problem. He didn't like to conform to the rules. I talked to him a number of times and tried to give him some help. He had very few friends that I knew of. Speaking in an interview decades later, Rhines claimed to have suffered from attention deficit disorder that was left untreated. He needed a child psychologist, he said, but his mother was too proud and feared the stigma. Rhines' criminality stood out in the town of 800 people, but even the residents of McLaughlin could not have foreseen where his troubled path would take him. Constantly bucking authority, Charles Rhines dropped out of school his sophomore year at the age of 17. His father hoped a stint in the Army might shape him up. But his 3 years spent as an infantryman did little to change his disdain for authority and seemed to only hone his skills for violence. After getting out of the military, 21-year-old Rhines enlisted at the University of South Dakota in Springfield in the college's vocational training program. He lasted less than a year, getting expelled after he was caught stealing from a classmate's dorm room. In the first entry on what would become a lengthy rap sheet, Rhines was convicted of third-degree burglary and sentenced to 3 years in prison. He was paroled just 7 months later in June of 1978. Now sporting a shaved head and mustache, Rhines returned home to live with his parents in McLaughlin. If Richard and Ruth expected to find their son regretful and rehabilitated, they were greeted by another reality altogether. Within months, he was in trouble with the law again, but this time, he wouldn't get off so easy. According to the Rapid City Journal, Rhines put on one of his mother's wigs, sawed off the barrel of his father's shotgun, and robbed a liquor store in December of 1979. The crime landed Rhines a 10-year prison term. Even in custody, Rhines couldn't stay out of trouble. He was so hated by his fellow inmates in South Dakota that prison officials sent him to Washington State, fearing that if they didn't, he'd be beaten to death in his cell. Rhines served out his decade-long sentence in the Pacific Northwest before being discharged in the spring of 1987. He'd spent nearly a third of his life behind bars. That didn't stop him from getting a job at Diggum Donuts in the summer of 1991. Without doing a background check, Dennis Diggs hired Rhines as a night baker. The donut shop was growing and desperate for help. Co-workers almost immediately didn't like Rhines. His managers liked him even less. Diggum Donuts co-owner Connie Royer said, "There was something about him I did not trust." Royer ended up firing Rhines in February of 1992, just 3 weeks before the murder, for failing to follow orders. Before Rhines left, the then 35-year-old struck up a friendship with a much younger colleague, a teenager named Sam Harder. Harder, 17 years old, had only recently moved out of a strict religious home headed by his father, a Pentecostal minister. One day after work, Sam Harder gave Rhines a ride home, only to learn that his home was actually a seedy motel room in downtown Rapid City. Harder's Christian upbringing dictated that he offer some help. Harder said later, "I'd never heard of anyone living like that. He told me what he was paying to live there, and I said I'd rent out my extra room for that." The teenager agreed to allow Charles Rhines to move in, a decision he'd regret for the rest of his life. Within a few months of living together, Harder discovered that Rhines was gay after he discovered him watching gay porn. Rhines didn't mind that his secret was out, and Harder's sheltered childhood led him to consider it a novelty. Though Harder's co-workers teased him endlessly about living with a gay man, the teen was already well under Rhines' spell. Harder told the Argus leader that Rhines came on to him at one point and was angered when he rebuffed his advances. Not long after, Rhines told Harder he needed cash and planned to break into the donut shop to get it. Rhines even convinced Harder to drive him there. Harder later said, "I didn't care if he robbed the donut shop because I figured if the cops asked me questions about it, I could tell them the truth and he'd be out of my life." The pair parked down the street from the donut shop around 7:45 p.m., and Rhines jumped out. He told Harder to return in a half hour to retrieve him. Using a copy of the backdoor key he'd made while he was still an employee, Rhines entered the Diggum Donuts with ease and began stealing cash, checks, and coins from both the register and the back office. He was nearly done when Donnivan Schaeffer came inside. Speaking later to police, Rhines said the unfortunate meeting with Donnivan left him without options. Only 5 years removed from prison, he saw killing him as his best option to avoid going back. As soon as Rhines hopped back into Sam Harder's vehicle, the teen could tell something was very wrong. The ex-con admitted to the murder, holding a knife to Harder's throat and threatening to do it again unless the young man remained silent. It was the same knife he just used to kill Donnivan Schaeffer. Rhines kept a close eye on Harder for the next few hours until the teen had to leave for work at the Diggum Donuts in nearby Box Elder. Harder had only been on the job a few hours when his coworkers received a call and shared with him the shocking news of Donnivan Schaeffer's death. Harder said, "I didn't know what to think. Donnivan was my friend. I got sick. I had to go throw up." While Harder was at work, Rhines drove deep into the Black Hills to scatter his clothes and the murder weapon, which was never found. It wasn't until Donnivan Schaeffer's funeral that the extremely cold nature of his killer would be realized. Are you tired of waking up exhausted after spending a restless night in and out of your child's bedroom, desperately trying to help them fall back asleep? With the Hatch Rest, both you and your child can enjoy better sleep. The new and improved second-generation Hatch Rest makes sleep better and more magical for your entire family. The all-in-one Hatch Rest is a smart sleep device with a sound machine and nightlight that grows with your kids. Babies will love the soothing environment the Hatch Rest creates through continuous sounds of white noise and lullabies. If you have a toddler or big kid, the Hatch Rest can help them build sleep independence with color and sound cues. The Time for Bed feature notifies them when it's time to relax and prepare for sleep. Additionally, the Time to Rise signal in the morning indicates when it's appropriate to start the day, helping early risers stay in bed for longer. My daughter Stevie has never been more excited about sleep. We all know in today's digital age, kids are often glued to their devices, which makes it pretty challenging for them to prepare for bed. That said, the Hatch Rest has completely transformed my daughter's bedtime routine, providing her with something exciting to look forward to while also helping her unwind. Unlike conventional toys, the Hatch Rest benefits both of us. With its proven track record of aiding over 3 million babies and parents in achieving peaceful sleep, it's no surprise that the Hatch Rest consistently ranks as one of the most sought-after items on baby registries. Right now, Hatch is offering our listeners up to 15% off your purchase of a Hatch Rest and free shipping at hatch.co/murderish. So if you're ready for improved sleep for your kids and yourself, go to hatch.co/murderish to get up to 15% off and free shipping. That's hatch.co/murderish. As adults, most of us don't get a summer break from our job like we did as kids, so we need to take it upon ourselves to create that stress-free, fun summer vibe any chance we get. The thing is, we'll still have the responsibilities of life. We're still going to have the responsibilities of life, like figuring out what to eat every night, while also sticking to our dietary preferences. This summer, HelloFresh is here to take the work out of eating well. You can reach your goals with delicious calorie and protein-smart lunch and dinner options. Plus, there are new vegan recipes too. HelloFresh delivers mouth-watering, chef-crafted recipes and fresh ingredients to your door so you can spend your summer doing more of what you want. My daughter Stevie just started her summer break, and I want to spend more time with her while she's out of school. HelloFresh saves me time and energy by not having to figure out what to eat for dinner throughout the week, so I can spend more time creating summer memories with my family. And I can go from having a stir fry one night to homemade pizza or enchiladas the next night. With over 40 meals to choose from every week, there's an option for even the pickiest of eaters. And you don't need to be an experienced chef to whip up the HelloFresh meals. Each meal comes with pre-portioned ingredients and step-by-step instructions to walk you through the whole process. From easy-to-follow instructions to high-quality proteins and veggies, HelloFresh brings out your inner chef with every tasty, easy-to-prepare meal. You can also add snacks or more meals from the HelloFresh market as needed, like their s'more bundle for the kids. Try America's #1 meal kit today and go to hellofresh.com/murderish16 and use code MURDERISH16 for 16 free meals plus free shipping. That's hellofresh.com/murderish16. Unbelievably, Charles Rhines attended Donnivan's funeral, going so far as offering condolences to mourners and signing the guest book. Rhines reportedly told Connie Royer that the young man was where he should be, and he's in God's hands now. 2 weeks later, Rhines was gone, fleeing to Seattle. The police wouldn't be far behind. Steve Allender was a 30-year-old detective just 5 years on the job when the case of the donut shop slaying landed on his desk at the Pennington County Sheriff's Office. A native of the Black Hills, he knew local families wouldn't sleep soundly until the killer was brought to justice. Allender, who would go on to become mayor, gave an interview about the crime to the Argus Leader, South Dakota's largest newspaper, in 2014. His comments serve as the front page story's 72-point headline. Allender said, "It was evil. I've been in this business for 30 years, and the only nightmare I've ever had about police work was about Rhines. I feared him to a great extent." Allender told reporter John Holt that in the eerie dream, he felt a stinging pain in the back of his leg and turned around to see a smiling Charles Rhines holding a knife, ready to strike again. Allender said it was face to face. He was looking right at me. Arriving at Diggum Donuts on the morning of March 9, 1992, Allender and fellow investigators suspected the murder to be an inside job from the start. They rushed to interview employees past and present, trying to identify who from the friendly neighborhood donut shop could be capable of such a heinous act. Among the first people they spoke to, Sam Harder and his roommate Charles Rhines. Given his criminal history and recent firing from the store, Rhines made for a prime suspect. But Harder, afraid for his life, provided Rhines with a plausible alibi, telling the Argus Leader, "If I had said anything to the cops, he told me it would have been my family next." Allender was less than convinced, saying later, nothing in his interview that night made sense. He also said Rhines gave him an uneasy feeling, but it wasn't enough to make an arrest. Beyond a partial footprint, physical evidence at the crime scene was scant, and DNA was still in its infancy. The donut shop had no security cameras, and employees working at the video rental store next door were unable to make a positive ID. Early on, there was talk that an escaped prisoner by the name of William Patrick Bogle could have been responsible for killing Donnivan Schaeffer, given that the fatal stabbing occurred while the convicted felon was still on the run. The Rapid City Journal reported that Bogle was wanted for questioning about the murder when he was shot to death by police in a farmhouse about an hour from the crime scene. Those rumors were put to rest when authorities learned Bogle, who'd been serving a 12-year sentence for armed robbery with a knife, was in Sioux Falls, on the other side of the state, at the time of Donnivan's death. After 2 months, what police hoped would be an open and shut case was turning cold. Peggy and Ed Schaeffer kept the story in the press, telling local media over and over that their son deserved justice and that no one would be safe until he got it. Supporters helped put up $15,000 in reward money. Billboards were erected along busy Interstate 90 between Rapid City and Sioux Falls. While police in Rapid City were scrambling for clues, Sam Harder was living a nightmarish existence in the Seattle area. Rhines, hoping to keep a close eye on the one man who could send him to prison, demanded that Harder come live with him in the Northwest. Harder reluctantly complied, bringing with him his newfound girlfriend, 16-year-old Heather Shepard. It didn't take long for the runaway teen to realize she was in deep over her head. Excited to escape small-town South Dakota for the first time in her life, Shepard had unwittingly ended up in a diabolic love triangle. She told the Argus leader, "I could tell something was off right away." After the couple arrived in Seattle, Rhines told the young girl that her boyfriend was gay and belonged to him. He even threatened to kill her. Eventually, Rhines let on about Donnivan Schaeffer. That's when Shepard first heard about Rhines' involvement in an unsolved murder that had gripped her hometown. Shepard said about Rhines, "He took me in the bedroom that night and told me he'd killed Donnivan. He told me some pretty horrendous details. I couldn't believe what I was hearing." Charles Rhines and a fellow ex-con by the name of Matt Mihel carted the teens around King County, Washington, as they stole copper wire and stripped it to sell for Savage. One day, when all four of them were in the woods, the pair of crooks discussed shooting Shepard and leaving her for dead. Harder protested, telling the Argus leader, "I told him he'd have to shoot me first." The frightening episode finally came to an end in June of 1992. A keen-eyed Seattle police officer spotted Rhines and Harder arguing outside a motel room and decided to investigate. It was at that moment when Harder finally got the courage to speak up, telling the officer he was a runaway and that a minor female was being held in the room against her will. Once Seattle PD had Shepard in their custody, she told them everything about the threats, about the thefts, about the murder of Donnivan Schaeffer. Steve Allender recalls being at his desk in Rapid City when he received the call from Washington State. He hopped on a plane to Seattle and within hours was once again face-to-face with Charles Rhines, who was already his prime suspect. In a recorded confession from inside the King County Jail, Rhines spoke coolly of stabbing Donnivan Schaeffer twice, leading him into the storeroom and sitting him on a pallet before applying the coup de grace, a knife through the back of his neck. The interaction sent a cold chill down the veteran cop's spine. The detective said he was talking very calmly, but then he busted out this awful laugh that was 3 times as loud as his normal voice. It didn't take long for Rhines to be extradited to South Dakota for what would prove to be a short trial. The outcome of that trial, however, would take much, much longer to find resolution. The trial of Charles Rhines got underway in January of 1993 in a Rapid City courtroom. From the outset, the Pennington County District Attorney's Office painted the case in black and white. Pure innocence meets pure evil. Prosecutors regaled jurors with tales demonstrating the former convict's lack of remorse, from his burst of laughter during his interview with Steve Allender to testimony from a Rapid City cellmate who shared how Rhines had bragged about the slaying while awaiting trial. According to reporting from the Argus leader, the confession tape had jurors on the edge of their seat as they listened to Rhines provide a cold, calculating description of how he ended Donnivan's life in the back of the donut shop, where only weeks earlier they'd worked side by side. Outside of the criminal trial, Donnivan's family filed a lawsuit against Diggum Donuts, citing wrongful death and gross negligence. According to the suit, which was later settled out of court, the shop's owners failed to do enough to ensure the young man's safety, starting with hiring ex-con Charles Rhines without a background check. Had they done so, they would have known that Rhines had spent the better part of 10 years between South Dakota and Washington, serving time for armed robbery. Peggy Schaeffer recalled to the Rapid City Journal, sitting in court and scanning the defendant's face for any sign of remorse. Instead, when crime photos were shown, a brief smile passed across Rhines' face. Peggy said, "There is no remorse. We're not going to get it." It took the jury 3 hours to find Charles Russell Rhines guilty of first-degree murder. His penalty, the gas chamber. Steve Allender was present in court the day Rhines was sentenced to die. He told the Rapid City Journal that he was watching Rhines's face when 7th Circuit Judge John J. Konenkamp read aloud his sentence. It turned white. Allender said, "At that moment right then, I stopped caring about what happened to him because I felt for an instant he knew what Donnivan Schaeffer must have known at some point during that night, that his life was over." After the trial's conclusion, Pennington County District Attorney Dennis Groff decided not to charge Sam Harder as an accomplice. While the juvenile was aware of Rhines's plans to burglarize Diggum Donuts and drove him to and from the scene, the DA decided that Harder had no hand in Donnivan Schaeffer's death, nor did he benefit from it financially. Despite testimony from Rhines that the two had counted the money together, and the fact that Harder lied to police on multiple occasions, Groff concluded the youth had been manipulated, threatened, and controlled by a hardened, habitual criminal. Sam Harder would be arrested just 3 years later after stealing and forging checks that belonged to his father. He told the Argus later that his short time spent with Charles Rhines had changed his life dramatically. Harder said, "I've been through a lot because of decisions that were partially mine, partially Charlie's." After prison, Harder moved to Missouri and became a truck driver, leaving behind the daughter he had with Heather Shepard before the two split. Charles Charlie Rhines was sent to the South Dakota State Penitentiary in Sioux Falls to await lethal injection. But his final chapter would prove longer than anyone could have predicted. After sentencing, Rhines filed the first of many appeals, arguing not that he was innocent, but that he did not deserve the death penalty. He claimed the jury had handed down the severe punishment because he was gay. According to him, the jury were homophobic and decided to sentence him to death rather than life in prison because they thought he would enjoy being in prison with other men. As evidence, Rhines's attorneys pointed to a series of 9 questions the jury had asked the judge in the hours before their final decision, all dealing with his sexuality. Some wanted to know whether Rhines would be housed with another man. Others inquired about whether he would be permitted to have sex in prison. Rhines said, "It's pretty obvious they were contemplating my sexuality in their deliberations after they had promised not to do so. And both the prosecutors and the judge realized that when they saw the list of questions." State Attorney General Jason Ravensborg wasn't impressed. He told the state's high court that the jury sentenced Rhines to death due to the heinous nature of the crime, not because they were homophobic, and that his homophobia argument didn't come until years after the trial. The Supreme Court ruled in the 2017 Pena-Rodriguez versus Colorado case that defense lawyers can use evidence that jurors relied on racist stereotypes or beliefs to argue that their client had an unfair trial. Daniel Harawa, a lawyer with the NAACP Legal Defense and Educational Fund, who filed a brief in support of Rhines's argument, sought to extend the rule to include anti-gay discrimination. Harawa said to the Rapid City Journal, "The court should find that LGBT discrimination is also unconstitutional when deciding a person's death sentence." In 2016, a set of Rhines's attorneys were able to get 2 jurors to admit on the record that his sexual orientation did come into play. According to a sworn affidavit, one juror said, "We also knew that he was a homosexual and thought he shouldn't be able to spend his life with men in prison." Another juror added, "We thought if he's gay, we'd be sending him where he wants to go if we voted for life imprisonment." And yet, jurors who were interviewed in the years immediately following the sentence said there was no shortage of aggravating factors that encouraged them to choose death for Charles Rhines. Among them, killing for money, killing a witness to a crime, and killing with a depraved mind. One woman said she thought about the images of Donnivan Schaeffer, who was stabbed in the stomach, back, and skull, and how awful it was. The homophobia defense bought Rhines nearly a decade of additional time as the case slowly worked its way through the court system. Because South Dakota doesn't have a death row, Rhines was kept in administrative segregation with 2 other men facing death and 20 other high-risk inmates. The only physical contact he received was from jail staff, his attorneys, and approved clergy. Family was forced to speak through 10 inches of thick glass. While Rhines spent 23 out of 24 hours every day in a 13-foot by 6-foot cell, the family of Donnivan Schaeffer lived in a prison of their own. Every few years, they'd be dragged into court for hearings and testimony, each time having to relive the startling details of their son's death and reopen those old wounds. Despite stories in the press that suggested homophobia did come into play at sentencing, the Supreme Court ultimately decided not to hear Rhines's case. Prosecutors argued all along that the sentence resulted from Rhines's callous actions, not his sexual orientation. In his final arguments against Rhines' appeal in 2019, South Dakota Attorney General Jason Ravensborg pointed out that the convicted killer had been fighting the case longer than his victim had been alive. On November 4, 2019, Charles Rhines was put to death by lethal injection, more than 27 years after the murder inside Diggum Donuts. He was pronounced dead at 7:39 p.m. In his final statement, he forgave Donnivan Schaeffer's parents and thanked his legal team. In the months leading up to Rhines's execution date, Peggy Schaeffer said, "They say, oh, it will give you closure. No, it won't. We still have birthdays and Christmases without our son." A written apology sent by Rhines a year earlier carried little meaning. Peggy said, if he were sorry, he could have said it a long time ago. Now, 20 years later, he's sorry? I don't buy it. 3 decades since his passing, Donnivan Schaeffer's name lives on in the Black Hills. Every year, the best young archers in the state compete to lay claim to the Donnivan Schaeffer Memorial Trophy. It's awarded to 1 male and 1 female in the South Dakota's Archer Association's state indoor shoot. In a 2019 interview with the Rapid City Journal, Peggy Schaeffer said of her son Donnivan, "He's beside me all the time." His father, Ed Schaeffer, said, "You don't know how much faith you have until you need it." Now in her 60s, Peggy said she still thinks about what her curly-haired boy would have accomplished if he was still alive, telling the paper, "I missed having a daughter-in-law. I missed grandchildren. My son misses his brother. My grandchildren miss an uncle and an aunt. There's always that hole, always that chair at the table that's never filled during the holidays." So the family lights a candle and places a rose on the table in honor of Donnivan's memory. And he is there. We know it. Thank you for joining me on this episode of Murderish. Make sure you're following me on Instagram and TikTok at Jami on Air. That's Jami on Air on Instagram and TikTok. On social media, I recap a lot of true crime cases and I take you behind the scenes at my recording studio, so give me a follow at Jami on Air. If you'd rather listen to the podcast with no interruptions, you can do so by signing up for Murderish Behind the Mic on Patreon. To sign up for Murderish Behind the Mic, visit murderish.com or just go to patreon.com and search for Murderish there. I want to send a big thank you to Stacy J and Tyler for becoming patrons and supporting the show. If you need more podcasts to listen to, I host another true crime podcast called Dirty Money Moves: Women in White Collar Crime. The podcast follows my investigation of a woman I met a few years ago, a woman who turned out to be a prolific scam artist. I also recently launched a brand new podcast called TrendVETTERS. If you want to see what that show is all about, there's a trailer you can listen to now as well as a few episodes. Just search TrendVETTERS in any podcast app. If you enjoy Murderish, consider leaving a positive rating and review in any podcast app. This episode was researched and written by Brant. Visit murderish.com for a list of sources used for this episode. And remember, listening to this podcast doesn't make you a murderer. It just means you're murder-ish.